Well, this is the Dean Abbott podcast. Today I'm talking to Jeremy Wayne Tate, who is the founder of the Classic Learning Test, an alternative to the SAT and ACT. Thanks for doing this, Jeremy.
Dean Abbott, what an honor. Great to meet you in person as well.
Thank you. Tell me a little bit about what the Classic Learning Test is and how it functions as an alternative to these established.
Yeah. It may seem initially, Dean, like this is the most boring. Like we're talking standardized testing. What could possibly be more boring, than standardized testing? But the reality is, standardized testing kind of flies under the radar, probably because it's so boring, as this really powerful lever that ends up kind of driving curriculum, right? Especially on the most important tests, like the SAT or the ACT. Whatever is going to be on those tests is going to have a huge influence in shaping curriculum at the secondary level. So our thought about 10 years ago was, what if kids were reading Aristotle? What if they were reading Thomas Aquinas or maybe Flannery O'Connor or Toni Morrison in the modern world, right? How would that reshape what they're actually doing in the classroom if that was the case? And so we've been at it for about 10 years, but we see ourselves, Dean, as a small part of a much bigger movement to reclaim tradition, to reclaim truth, goodness, and beauty in education.
Mm-hmm. To reclaim truth, goodness, and beauty in education. So are you an advocate of what's called, say, classical Christian education or classical? What is that? What does that mean?
Yeah, big fan, big advocate of it. And I very much see CLT as a part of the classical renewal movement in a big way. And so classical, what is it? Well, the main difference is that the telos is different. The goal is different. When I taught, I would ask my students, and I partly would ask them because I didn't know. I was trying to figure it out myself. This is 15 years ago. I'd say, what are we doing here? Why are we here? What's the point of school? And they would almost always say something like, to get a better job, right? These are juniors in high school, to get a better job, to get a better job. And they would kind of say it like, we know, Mr. Tate, we know this already. We got to do good in school to get a better job. And then I would write up on the whiteboard, the object of education is to learn to love what is beautiful. Mm-hmm. Plato. All right. It's not a direct quote, but it's a synthesis from the Republic. That is classical education, I believe. It has this goal that the cultivation of virtue, becoming more fully human, that is actually the telos, the right goal of education, and that we're ripping kids off, right? When we're telling them that the whole point of their education is to become a cog in a big economic wheel or something. We've got to get back to education as human formation.
What is the problem to which classical education is the solution? Maybe you already touched on it.
Yeah, I think the problem is this kind of transactionary, empty credentialing, where students go through 12 years, they don't have any real core knowledge. They're not necessarily generous or kind or patient, self-controlled people. We're wasting these precious years in the lives of young people. We're not giving them a hard skill in the trades, welding or something, but we're also not giving them any real core knowledge into a tradition as well. So the problem that classical education solves is the main problem of modern education, right? Education changed dramatically in the early 20th century, and it was in some ways kind of hijacked by what were then radical fringe progressives. Their ideology, though, has now become kind of the mainstream of education. So it doesn't seem fringe anymore. It seems very normal now, right? But the idea always was the case that the point of education was human freedom. Freedom from what? Human from enslavement to our impulses, to our baser selves, right? That education would allow us to be free, to pursue the good, to pursue the beautiful.
It seems like if you replace what is essentially a moral purpose that you're describing, a purpose for education that's fundamentally tied to some conception of the good, with a purpose for education that is, as you said, simply economic and about fitting into a larger system. It seems like generations of that kind of education might lead to a society in which depression, for example, is so normal that most people don't. The only thing we call depression is when it gets to the point of suicidality.
Hmm.
And that we would have millions of people who can't conceive any point to their lives beyond consumer activity.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, that's exactly what we've gotten.
I think you're saying it so well, and young people that don't have enough historical perspective to even know that they're living in a wasteland in some ways, a cultural wasteland in a way, right? And to think that what they're experiencing is in any way normal.
Mhm, mhm. Yes, it's not normal historically, but it is normal in terms of the last 50 years for them. It's
Totally.
interesting
Yeah.
that you say that. I used to ask when I taught at the college level, I used to ask my students, "Why are you in college?" And of course, they would all say, "Well, to get a better job." And I
Hmm.
would simply point out to them that they contrary to what they think, they literally know nothing about getting a job,
Hmm.
and that there. And I taught communication, journalism, new media, video production courses, and I would simply say to all of them, there's not one of you right now, even if you're a freshman here, who couldn't find a different path to get a job in this field that you
Mm.
want.
Yeah.
Because for $200, you could get on Amazon and buy yourself a cheap high definition video camera and order some software, download some free software to edit your videos on. If you want to be a filmmaker, that's all you need, and you have a free YouTube channel. So
Yeah.
just go do it and find a way in.
Yep. Yep.
And I would say, so given that you know literally nothing about how people get jobs and why would you be here? And at that point, they would often be a little bit angry at me for challenging the sort of the myth they had been fed their entire
Mm.
lives.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you
Yeah.
find this kind of resistance coming up for you?
Oh,
And
I absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think and look, what's happening, and there's this great quote, I can't think of the author, but we were, 100 years ago, we were teaching Latin in elementary school, and now we're teaching remedial English in college, right?
Mhm.
I mean, it has been just such a steep, rapid decline. But look, I think this is what happens, Dean, is that when you remove the transcendentals from any kind of education, when you remove questions about the human capacity for good, the human capacity for evil. Kids just get bored. School's just boring at that point, right? I remember thinking this was very interesting when I was teaching that even the most like checked out kid, he's always checked out. You start teaching about the Holocaust, you start teaching about the horrors of Stalinist Russia. Suddenly they're very interested. They're paying attention. Why? Well, because I think students are uniquely and naturally interested in these questions about, again, the human capacity for good, the human capacity for evil, but we're not giving that to them right now. These deeper questions that then can ignite a love for all kinds of various subjects. We're skipping the main point.
It seems to me that the problem is not merely in curricula, but that people who teach, say, public school, go through an education credentialing process themselves, which doesn't require them to read Aristotle.
Mm-hmm.
I think you could probably get a degree in English education at certainly in most state schools in the United States, and more or less never read a novel. I think you could skate through an education program.
Oh yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So
How
what do you think
wild.
about that?
Well, the president of our academic board, a brilliant, beautiful friend of mine who's just got the most the greatest heart for this kind of education. Her name's Dr. Angel Adams Parham, professor at the University of Virginia, author of The Black Intellectual Tradition. She told me one time, she said, Jeremy, I went from, kindergarten all the way through PhD, went to Yale. I had never really read Dante or Homer or Aristotle, right? How does that happen? She's a top professor at the University of Virginia, and the only reason she started reading Dante and Homer is because she was classically homeschooling her own children, right? This has become very normative.
Mhm. So what? So I guess the question is, if the goal, part of the goal of CLT is to begin shifting curriculum across the country
Yeah.
to reflect, as sort of to prepare students for the test. What do you do when you have thousands of teachers who not only have not read Dante, but simply could not read Dante?
Um, it's a fantastic question. So we're seeing this across the movement right now, the classical renewal movement, a real challenge with finding qualified teachers, right? You've got a bunch of, homeschooling moms who maybe their oldest kid is out of the house and they're being recruited. Say, we need you in this classical charter school down the road. There's kids that are in need of a great teacher there. So it's a real challenge, no doubt about it.
Mhm. Mhm. What do you say then about how does your vision incorporate schools that are something other than more or less, at least socially functioning middle class schools? So assume an inner city school where things barely hold together at all during the day.
Yeah, yeah.
How would such changes be implemented there?
Yeah, my first 3 years teaching were in inner city New York, in Brooklyn, Progress High School, 2004 to 2007. 100% minority serving population. These students were in a world of suffering, a world of pain. Um, what they needed was classical education. And what we have seen is that schools like True North in Florida, schools like Hope Academy in Minneapolis, they're serving the poorest of the poor in some of America's inner cities, and they're doing this radically wild, counterintuitive thing. They're saying, all right, these kids that are coming from families and gangs and violence and drugs and abuse, let's teach them Latin. Let's teach them beautiful cursive. What? Well, what about the practical skills? No, they understand that when a student creates something beautiful, their view of themselves changes and what they can do, what they're capable of, right? And so I believe classical is not just for the elite, the well-to-do. It is for all people, all students, all races, uh, both genders.
What difference does cursive make?
I think I always say it this way. I think cursive matters because beauty matters, right? There's all kinds of things people will say about your motor skills, and you're going to be a better surgeon because you can control your hand and have the better communication between your brain and your motor skills. But I think it's cultivating the desire to be a creator of beauty, but also um, even the connections themselves, right? In the language, in the letters, right? Learning how to express oneself eloquently. I think that is ultimately what cursive, it's weird. I just say this anecdotally, but if you think about the people you know in your own life who have beautiful, beautiful cursive, in my experience, I don't know too many people that have beautiful penmanship, but they're just total slobs. Their car's a mess, their house is a mess, but they've got beautiful penmanship. Doesn't really go that way. In my experience, it reflects a well-ordered mind, and often even a well-ordered life as well. I think it can be an overflow of the interior life to be able to express oneself beautifully with a pen.
Can well, I'll ask that in a moment. What's the objection to cursive?
I heard I heard an objection to cursive. It's one of my clear memories. I was probably in fourth or fifth grade, and I was struggling with cursive. My cursive still is not very good. I love beautiful penmanship, but I don't really have it. I work on it. But the teacher said, when you all grow up, everybody's going to be typing. You don't have to worry about cursive, you know. The most important thing I think I've done in the past 10 years has been writing handwritten letters to potential investors to get behind the CLT idea. And as I was writing those letters, I was thinking about the irony, right? You'll never need to do this. Did I need to do that? No, I didn't need to do that. But yeah, I do think we're all pragmatists. We've absorbed a culture that says, you know, if it's not useful, this is the mindset of utilitarian mainstream factory education. If you're not going to use it, why do it? That's the question. Why do poetry, right?
Mhm.
Why do theater, right? The things that make life the most beautiful. I think of the C.S. Lewis quote, right? When he describes friendship this way as well, right? He says, you know, friendship, like art, like philosophy, is one of those things that is not necessary to survival, but one of the things that gives value to survival itself, right? These are the highest things that make any culture worth preserving.
What is the role of technology in education? What should it be? Because it seems to me that the question of technology, you raise it when you talk about typing versus cursive, that the question of what technology can do for us is really at the heart of this discussion. Because if the purpose of human life is simply to learn to manipulate some technology, then then a completely utilitarian education makes sense until such time as we no longer need people to manipulate technologies, at which point I would assume within the current
Mhm.
paradigm there would be no need for education at all, except perhaps some kind of training people to obey the law.
Yeah.
So, how much of what you're objecting
And
to is
and maybe not
technology
much of
driven?
that. I mean, we're straight Brave New World, like just entertained to death and controlled through entertainment. Um, Gosh, I think I missed the question. I was so fascinated.
No, I just was saying, what's the role of technology? What do you see as the proper role of technology in the right kind of education?
Yeah, not much. Very little, very little. I think some of the very best schools I've toured are using very little, if any, technology at all. They're intentionally and thoughtfully removing students from the tyranny of the present. And to remove students from the tyranny of the present is to remove them from technology for a bit. It's so silly. I mean, I hear some of these schools talking about they need to equip students to navigate. You're not going to equip a 13-year-old. They don't need that. They don't need that help. They need to know how to remove themselves from it long enough to think, to have a thought of their own, right? That is not just being entertained. And so I think great schools, great classical schools are leading an effort to just get technology out. In some ways, completely out. Look, Dean Abbott, I'm 2 blocks away right now from St. John's College in Annapolis. No majors, great books, a deep dive into the Western intellectual tradition. They make the most amazing hires ever. And I've employed several, including our chief technology officer, right? They're doing the most techie things. When I think about our Johnnies here, they had an education totally removed from technology. So it doesn't translate that to teach kids tech is going to make them good at tech later on. To teach them how to think well is going to help them with tech later on.
I know you have to run here pretty soon. We have to keep this short, but just answer this question quickly. What is the relationship between the education and the soul? And is it possible to have any kind of real or decent education in a system where the assumption is that souls are irrelevant?
Hmm. Or that souls don't exist. Yeah, it's a great question. You look at I mean, education as we know it, the university system as we know it, arose at a time when theology was regarded as the queen of the sciences, right? And that conviction, um, that was the conviction that led Oxford and Cambridge and the University of Paris to be built with their beautiful spires, and they were pointing upwards towards the heavens. If you go even into, ironically enough, the architecture building at many of the big state universities. Sometimes the architecture building is the ugliest building on campus.
Mhm.
You walk in there compared to walking around Oxford or Cambridge, and your soul is being impacted by both experiences, right? You're swallowed up by the grandeur of a place like this, like Oxford and Cambridge, whereas these other ones you feel cramped, you feel uh, it feels wrong, you know.
Mhm.
And so when I bring it up because I think architecture is such a great way to get at how education materializes and manifests itself in the physical world, right? And then the impact that that has on our hearts, on our souls, as we're in these spaces.
I remember being a late teenager and having the question occur to me, why is everything old so much prettier?
Hmm.
So, why is everything old so much prettier?
What conclusion did you come to, Dean?
Well, when I was 19, I think I assumed that, yeah, I think in my unformed state as a teenager, I think I simply assumed that somehow people in the past were better, and that they kind of cared more. And I think I probably assumed that contemporary people, modern people, were insensate to meaning. That they're just they couldn't detect the meaning of things. That's probably more sophisticated than I put it to myself. I probably just thought, well, modern people are stupid. That's probably what I thought. Right?
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It's because you raised the question of what's the difference between walking around Oxford and Cambridge and walking around, I don't know, the University of Nebraska or whatever. So I guess another question that raises is that Oxford and Cambridge were built not for Jenny, whose dad is a welder down at the factory or whatever, the way that the University of Nebraska is built to elevate her from working class to professional class. So, given that the place like Oxford was built with a different purpose in mind, what do you say to that? What do you say to the objection that the kind of education you're advocating for can't really be provided at a mass scale to achieve the overall economic uplift of the population? And that it's good for Jenny to be able to go to the University of Nebraska and come out as a dental hygienist, and that it's actually better for her overall quality of life if she can make a living as a dental hygienist and not never have read Aristotle than to have read Aristotle and not have a job. I guess the question is, how do you address the practical issue that forms the basis of the objection?
Yeah,
How do
I
people get
think I go
jobs?
back to Du Bois, to thinking about Du Bois and his, in some ways, audience, when he says he's not, in the work of making men into carpenters, but carpenters into men, and so I think you can have, Look at a college right now, like the College of St. Joseph the Worker, new school in Ohio. They've got like 5 majors, plumbing, HVAC, welding, all hard trades. But they're marrying that with great books, classical education as well. And the end result is something everybody wants, right? Is that you can have a great conversation with the person coming into your home, that they can run a company that's reputable, that you trust, and that they've got these amazing knowledge into these trades that we obviously have a big void, have a big gap right now. So I don't think it's an either or. I think it can absolutely be a both and that they can really complement each other at the same time.
So there's a future for it.
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
All right. Well, tell people out where they can go to learn more about the CLT, since I know your time is short.
Yes, Dean Abbott, thank you very much. Visit us at cltexam.com. And yeah, appreciate your time today. It's an honor to be a guest, and thanks for the great work that you're doing.
Thanks.